So thank you all for joining us today for our event. One of the things that we've tried to do over the last couple of years is to have something in awareness of BeBe Moore Campbell Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we've been doing this for the last several years since we started Therapy for Black Kids. So for those of you who are new to our page, I'm Dr. Earl Turner. I'm the founder and executive director of Therapy for Black Kids. I'm also the author of a new book, Raising Resilient Black Kids. And one of the reasons that I started the organization was really to provide some information and resources to parents and caregivers and those that support Black youth. And we do a lot of this through our social media pages, in particular Instagram, but we also host periodically events like this, so that way we can have a little bit more of intimate connections with the people that follow us. I'm excited today to have a very special guest join us, Dr. Thema Bryant. She is a psychologist, minister, author, podcast host. The list goes on and on. She's also a former president of the American Psychological Association. So thank you, Dr. Thema, for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for being a part of the dream team for the campaign to make it happen.
Absolutely happy to support. And so just a couple of quick announcements today. Throughout the conversation, if questions come up, I know sometimes it's hard to hold those to the end, so feel free to let us know in the chat what comments that you have. And then we'll also make some time toward the end to open it up again, so that if there are some new questions that come up, you can share those as well. And we also have a raffle. So for those that submitted their information with the registration, we would do that toward the end of the event today. So feel free to stick around. You have to be present to win. And so, we will look forward to sharing that. We will give away a couple of Dr. Thema's books, as well as a copy of my book as well for those that attend. So, as I mentioned, this is in recognition of BeBe Moore Campbell Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. The reason for this month is really to highlight some of the challenges that we've experienced in the Black community around seeking therapy, to talk about some of the stigma that has prevented many people from seeking out care. And we also know that, while I say social media has helped us to improve access to these types of conversations and to make people be more open to going to therapy, I think the reality is that there are still challenges that exist in terms of accessing care. And sometimes it is people being reluctant to go to discussing really sensitive issues or to open up some of those wounds. And I talk a lot with my clients that, a lot of times when you leave a therapy session, you may not feel great because they can get really heavy. And I think, for some people that makes them a little bit reluctant to go to open up those wounds that they've maybe been dealing with, for a really long time. And so today's conversation is really around how do we raise kings and queens, in particular, how do we raise our children to have a self-awareness about themselves, but also to be mentally and physically healthy and whole. And I think part of that is navigating some of these really tough and difficult issues that we experience as a community, as it relates to oppression and trauma and a lot of different experiences that many of us have. And so I'm going to start off the conversation really with opening up to you, Dr. Thema. I know your new book that is out talks a lot about healthy relationships, and in particular, healthy relationships with yourself. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of what are some of the myths or messages within the Black family or Black community that we need to really unlearn to fully embrace healing and emotional restoration.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and just really appreciate your book and this platform and the work to help our children and families to be healthy. And I think one of the myths that we want to really counter is this idea that parents have to be super hard on their children in order to prepare them for the real world.
Mm,
And what that often ends up looking like is children who are more sensitive, and I would be amongst those, end up their spirits being broken instead of being built up. So, in an effort to prepare our children for racism and just the hardness of life, sometimes their first really violation can happen in the home. And so the idea that being harsh makes stronger kids is actually not true. That when children have what we call a secure attachment, when they feel like the adults who are raising them care about them, believe them, are invested in them, are nurturing of them, then that is what gives children confidence to be able to go out in the world because there are people who believe in me as opposed to people who are constantly tearing me down. So I would say, we want to reject the myth that harshness is what builds strength as opposed to a supportive environment helping children to be strong. I think another myth that we want to reject is the idea that talking about our difficulties makes them real. And so to try to fight them, we choose silence. So not only do we say, don't talk about family stuff outside of the house, but many of us don't talk about family stuff in the house.
Mm,
And I think it is a misunderstood spiritual principle where people will say things like, don't speak that, right? Thinking that if I speak it, that makes it real. And so then we require secrecy and silence from young people who are actually struggling. So if a child is afraid, but they can't say it, if they're depressed, but they can't say it, if they're insecure, but they can't say it, then they're not able to have a refuge and access to adults who can actually guide them. So then they're left trying to either figure it out on their own or they're connecting with peers. So other children are giving them advice because we have made ourselves inaccessible by requiring the silence.
mm. Yeah, no, that's a really important point. I think um, one of the conversations that I've had sometimes around like talking with kids about racism is like having a conversation then like sets them up to like have this negative outlook on the world. And so I think that goes along with what you were mentioning about like this silence that we sort of instill in our kids. And for me, it is that we know that these incidents are happening and definitely in the school system very frequently. And so if we don't provide that space for children to talk about these issues and give them the tools to navigate that, then they're just sort of dealing with this, or they internalize these messages and they feel like I'm the problem as opposed to the people that they're sort of engaging with. I'm
Yes,
glad you
I'm
brought
so
that up.
glad you raised that example because we can leave our children unprepared. So we have this idea of, I don't want to break their self-esteem by telling them that racism exists. So then when they encounter it, they don't even recognize it. They think it's something about them. They think they did something wrong. And so then we have left them unprepared and without the skills to both recognize it and to respond and to get support. So I think sometimes people assume if you're telling them about the realities of racism, then you're just leaving that heavy weight on them without
Mm,
any other information. So, yes, we speak about racism. I'm going to say at an age appropriate level, because I want to tell you, Dr. Earl, I grew up in Baltimore and they have a couple of Black museums there. And I went one year, and on the first floor and second floor were all like Black inventors and their inventions and their pictures and things like that. They had an exhibit in the basement, and there was a sign that said, only for it's like 13 and up or 15 and up. And this Black mother had her two little kids who were like elementary school age, and she takes them down there and says, you all need to see this. And it was literally an exhibit on lynching. So
mm,
they didn't need to see that, right? Yes, we can say that those realities exist, that there's violence or that people have been tortured, but to like carry them around from picture to picture, requiring that, thinking that is somehow uh, strengthening them, that's not what we're advocating for. So an education and a awareness at an age appropriate level, so that our children will have a sense of their story. And it really is also the story of our resilience, what we have come
Mm.
through and what we have survived.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up about like age appropriate, because I do think like the ways that you communicate these things to a young child that's under 10 should be very different than a adolescent when you're having these types of conversations, and
Yeah,
that exposure can have different impacts
right.
on children as well. So I appreciate that. So sort of going off of what you just mentioned around this resilience piece, in your book, you talk a lot about healing and connection. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that Black families can begin to like work through this healing, especially some of the generational trauma that we've experienced, whether it's racism or trauma within the families, but also consider the ways that we can root joy and love in those healing messages as well.
Yeah. I think it is important for us to think about play as a resistance strategy. That, yes, there's protests and people can, take young people to protest march and let them make their own signs and feel like you're a part of a collective. I remember one of the marches here in LA. My daughter had written a poem. Didn't you hear him say that he couldn't breathe? And she was like the youngest speaker, and like that's like a pivotal memory for her, that like she spoke up. So, like, marches and protests are important, and that's one way to engage. But also, we say Black joy is an act of resistance, because with everything that is happening, especially in these times, if we let what we currently see dictate our mood all the time, we would be in a state of despair. And so, joy is not a denial about the suffering that is happening. It is being proactive and engaging in things that can bring us joy as a family. So, having a game night is a fun way to do it, because I think sometimes in some families, it's like send the kids away to play, which is, fine
Mm,
for people to have peer to peer play. But there is also a different sense when the parents participate, when the adults participate. So I would say, engaging in play, and in the play that is fun to your kid, right? Not just the
mm.
things we don't want to do. So, I have a daughter and a son. My son is into video games. I'm not good at them, but I'll play it, right? So that is one way to cultivate our joy. Another one, with our expressive arts. So I know both of us love to dance,
Mhm.
but then whether it's dance or singing or visual art or poetry, that's a great way for children to learn how to express themselves, and also for them to learn about our culture, exposing them to, artists from these various traditions, is a way of bringing our joy. So, and telling our story. So in psychology, we have something called narrative therapy, and it's important the story we tell ourselves, not only about us as individuals, not only about our family, but as our community. And so being intentional to speak about the ways in which we've had agency or voice or empowerment, the ways in which we have accomplished, the ways in which we survived. So, feeding them the stories that they might not get in the classroom, especially in
Mm.
these times. We can't be dependent on the schools to tell us. And so, we tell our children our story so they can experience that pride.
Absolutely. Yeah, all of those are important. And one of the things I talk about in my book is like really engaging kids to like learn about what are the experiences that they do enjoy. Because I think sometimes as a parent, it's like, well, these are things that you like, or these are things that you think would be fun to the kid, but they think it's like boring or whatever.
Right.
So it is like, how do you get the input from your child to
Right.
make sure like these are some of the things that they also find joy in as well?
Yes.
And sometimes as an adult, like you have to sort of bite the bullet to say, maybe I don't like to do this as much, but I'll do
Right.
it just to sort of have
Yeah.
that moment with my child, which I think, as a child, we really appreciate having those moments where we can
Right.
connect, with our kids and
Yes.
adults.
And it gives us, we call it openness to new experiences. You know, and initially you may do it just because it's what your child likes, but then you could actually enjoy it. I remember during the pandemic, we couldn't really go out, so we got a trampoline for the backyard. And so after seeing all these clients all day, back to back to back, I would go out in the trampoline with my son and just jump, just jump. And, after a while, I'm enjoying myself and looking forward to like, when are we going on the trampoline?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So in my book, I talk about some of the parenting strategies, particularly as it relates to fostering resilience in children in the face of like racism. And so, what does it look like to raise emotionally resilient children while also affirming their racial and cultural identity? Sort of as a segue to some of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think, one of the ways that we can do that is reminding ourselves and our children that as human beings, we have a full range of emotions and that there is room for all of those different emotions. I often share the story of growing up. The line I heard, which I think many of us heard, is fix your face.
Mm,
And that fix your face with like, you should never look like anything but pleasant or grateful. And, I understand the desire to raise children who are polite or who have good manners. But when that is like a requirement all the time, we end up having adults who are not in touch with their emotions. So, if you've ever been in a conversation with someone and they're clearly upset and you say they're upset and they're like, no, I'm not, I don't care. Right.
yeah.
So, we want to start creating space for our children to say how they feel, like you were saying, like, if I'm bored, then I'm bored. And the truth is, yeah, sometimes we do have to endure some things that are boring, but I should at least be able to tell the truth about that, like
Mm,
that was not enjoyable to me. And so that helps us to have, emotional wholeness and wellness. I started a tradition with my kids of at the end of the day, sharing like our best and worst moment of the day. And I participate as well. So it models for them that we don't have to be silent about our difficulties and that we can also have things that we're grateful for. I think many of us from like that religious or spiritual background are used to having people say thank you, right? And that's, a
mm,
cultural and religious piece is gratitude. Um, but to also have room for the things that like didn't feel good or that didn't go well that day, because that can open things up, which also, recognizing kids have different personalities, right? So my daughter is a talker, and without much prompting, she will like talk me through the details of her whole day. My
mm.
son, you're gonna have to ask a number of questions. And, first you're gonna get those short answers of, nothing or I don't know, right? But by us having that time period at the end of the day of the best and the worst, then suddenly he's sharing something that he would not have shared. And so trying to create that space and meeting kids where they are.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you shared that because one of the things I mentioned in my book is that I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on talking with kids about like deep emotional issues, especially when it comes to like, racism. And so I think like trying to have these moments where it is like informal or like you're in the car, you're going for a walk, where you
Yeah.
can sort of do those check-ins. And I think kids are a lot more open to discuss
Yes.
things. And if it's like this sit down one-on-one type of
Right.
situation where there
Yeah.
is this pressure, on the
Hmm.
moment.
Hmm.
And the
Right.
other thing that you brought up, I think sometimes I've had situations either clinically or I can sort of recall back in my own experiences as a child where it's like, what do you have to worry about, as a kid? And so I think sometimes as adults and as parents, like we invalidate the child's experiences by saying like, you should be enjoying this
Mhm.
experience as a child, you don't have all these things that I maybe have to stress and worry about as an
Yeah.
adult, but kids do have things
Right.
that they worry about.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that because I often think, as adults, we get amnesia. It's like we forget how stressful it was, or how, for some of us, how terrible this was. So, this false memory that before I had to pay rent, I just had a joyful life, just not true. So, for us to, yeah, I mean, now we're like, oh, you get to take naps and you don't have to pay bills. That can all be true, and still young people can really be suffering emotionally. They can be in a lot of pain. They can have a lot of worry, sometimes about what they're experiencing directly, sometimes what they're hearing about in the world, and sometimes they're picking up on our stress. So, us walking around stressed out about these bills, or about our health, or whatever our concerns are, directly or indirectly, our children can take a hold of that.
Mhm.
So we do want to release that myth that until you're 18, you have no worries. It's not true.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Another thing that sort of to piggyback off of what you said, but also I know in your book you talk about this sort of survival, sort of warrior mode that sometimes we're in as adults, and I think as parents in particular. And so I think given the ways that for many of us as a Black community, like we've had to struggle, a lot for a lot of different reasons over the course of our life, and so it does make it hard sometimes to like release some of those traumas or difficult experiences that we've had. And so I guess my question is like, what does it look like to like begin to release some of this armor and like move towards a more liberated emotional present for yourself, but
Yeah.
also I think for as a parent.
Right. One of the things that help us to heal is being in a good community, having like a good circle around us. Um, because we call it social support. Social support or relationships are a protective factor. You think about the difficult moments you've had in your life, and how even if it didn't make it go away, when you had a good friend or a family member who was with you as you're going through it, it made a difference. It's like if I'm laid off and I have like that best friend who just reminds me in the meantime, right, that I'm still worthy, that something's going to go come through to put in another application. If I'm sick, someone who checks on me and cares about me. If we're going through a breakup or a divorce, having people who like stand in the gap. So to help us to survive and not just be hardened by it, it helps to let people in. And it is true that when we have been disappointed by others, betrayed, abandoned, abused by others, we can isolate ourselves. And sometimes we teach that to our children.
Mm,
There are parents who directly tell their kid, don't trust nobody. And so now we're, raising a kid who is isolated with trust issues. And so I understand, where that comes from, that clearly people have been hurt. But in terms of how we heal, we call it gradual exposure, right? So in your mind now, you may not feel like you're ready for a bestie or ready for a new romantic relationship, but can I at least start trying to do small talk with my neighbor, or at the school drop off, or with my coworkers? Can I not just like eat lunch in my car by myself, right?
mhm,
So we call it goals that you set for yourself. You want them to stretch you, but for it to be attainable, right? So even you may have some friends you haven't called in a while. So if you say, this week I'm going to call somebody, even if it's a short conversation, that at least is breaking me out of my armor. And then, you build on that over time. That's how relationships grow. That's how friendship grows. And so many times we do the either or, where we don't say anything to anyone. And all of us have those kinds of friends you've known for years and you don't really know anything about them. Or you have people who, soon as they meet you, they're telling you like their whole life story. and then they end up feeling hurt because it was like they said too much too soon. So allow friendships and relationships to grow over time, and that can help you to put down the armor because you start to see, oh, this person has a good heart or this person is well intentioned. And then if they're not, okay, at least I got to see that and I can, make an adjustment.
Yeah, that's great. And I think also, as you sort of touched on earlier, that modeling these things for your child is also really helpful, because even though you may not like verbally communicate some of these things about the importance of community or relationships or friendships to your child, if they see that like you're standoffish or you're having
Right.
problems maintaining some of those friendships too, like they're going to say, well, I don't need friends, or all those other things. And I think especially in today's society, where I would say like there's a lot of benefits from social media, but we also know that it also is creating a very like isolated, I think, society, especially among youth, and people are also struggling more to have, I'll say, appropriate social skills. And so I think all those things are also really important and necessary, so that we can sort of teach our kids, what are some of the ways that they can sort of navigate those experiences now, but also throughout their adulthood as well.
Right. And, being intentional about the kind of friends that we pick. Because you can spend time with people, follow people on social media who, are inspiring or uplifting, or you or your children may be following people that make you feel like worse and worse about yourself because of that compare despair. That,
Mhm.
these other people have these perfect curated lives, at least what they're presenting, and then people, children and adults, comparing that to their real lives. So not only to have community, but supportive community. And it's not about the number of them, it's about the quality of it. So, one or two good friends is a blessing.
Yep, absolutely. So we you sort of excuse me, you talked about joy as being an act of resistance a little bit earlier. And so I want to go back to that, especially I think now where we are in a time where there's a lot of uncertainty, confusion, sort of moving the clock back as it relates to being inclusive around a lot of different issues. And so, how can families prioritize joy in their daily lives, especially given some of these ongoing pressures in society and systemic inequalities that we continue to see?
Yeah. I think it is intentional and purposeful actions. So, you want to identify for yourself and help your children to identify what are your joy bringers and what are your joy robbers. So, there are
Mm,
things that steal our joy, there are people who steal our joy, and then there are things that, instead of triggers, we call them glimmers, right? That simple things, doesn't have to be something expensive, but certain things that just put a smile on your face. If you see it, or if a certain person calls, it's going to lift your spirit, or if you engage in a particular activity, it's going to lift you. And I said you have to learn them because we don't all have the same joy bringers. Like what is joyful for me, would be like going to an African dance class. My son would say no thank you, right? So that's all right. So I have to like learn what help him identify what brings him joy. Now, we want to keep in mind children, as with adults, evolve and change. So, what might have been their joy bringer 2 years ago, you may suddenly hear them like, I don't want to do that anymore. And
mm,
sometimes as adults, we do this thing of like, you can't quit. Well, people can evolve, their taste could change, they discover something else. So I think it's one thing to say you can't not do anything, but to allow people to shift if like that season is over and they're interested in exploring something else, to find out, what are your joy bringers and those simple pleasures. Because of course, any of us can name things that would be like super expensive of like, oh yes, if I could take the whole family on a vacation to this incredible place, sure, that could be joyful. But also in every city, you can Google, I'll say in most cities, you can Google like what are free things to do in your city.
mm,
And it's no cost or low cost. things that you can engage in as a family, whether that's a dance party in the house or going to a science museum or going, in the summer to a free concert in the park, um, or setting up a time for them to play with their friends.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm also glad that you um, gave us the language terminology about joy bringers,
Yeah.
because I think in this current like society, like we overuse this idea about like self care, and so when people hear it, it is like go to the vacations or the fancy trips or
Right.
a nice dinner or the spa for a lot of people. Get your hair and your nails done, which are great. But
Hmm.
I talk a lot about finding ways to like have this self-care joy that you can sort of instill in your life on a daily basis, because I think
Yeah.
that really helps to like balance so that you're not in like this sort of crisis mode to like when you sort of burn out and now you
Yeah.
want to figure out what to do. And I think for a lot of people, when they focus on like the self-care, the way that it's getting sort of monetized a lot is it is those things that you can't do every single day.
Right.
Unless you're
Yes.
rich.
Right. Right.
You can't do those every day.
Yes.
I appreciate
No, I
that.
love that. Considering like what are the things that can be a regular part of my day. For some, it could be as simple as like a morning ritual to say like I'm gonna wake up early enough where I could listen to some music or listen to a podcast and drink my tea. Or at lunch, instead of sitting in my car, I'm gonna go for a walk. Or I'm gonna call my bestie. That's in LA, the traffic is terrible. So the car is like great time for me to call my best friend or my cousin, right? And have a good old time while I'm driving. Or I used to listen to the book audio books, right, in the
Mm.
car. So finding ways to infuse some pleasure and joy into your day.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So the next question, and for people that are watching, if there are questions that you have for us, we will take questions shortly. So feel free to put those in the chat. I don't see any right now, but if you have questions, feel free to post those. So my next question is, what advice do you have for parents or caregivers who are trying to support their child's mental health, but also navigating their own sort of emotional healing or, in the current society, just sort of burn out from all the stressors that you're
Yeah.
dealing with?
Yes. So I would encourage parents to consider therapy or support group. Um, Sometimes we just try to like uh, push through, and you'll say like, oh, well, my parents or grandparents did it without therapy. But if we are honest and we look back on their lives, we can see some of the ways that wasn't good. That, yeah, they may have been good parents, but also, there are different ways that we bleed. And so it may have shown up with them being controlling. It may have shown up with addiction. It may have shown up with abusive, being physically abusive, where they're letting out their frustrations on you. And so, to break those cycles, maybe the people who raised me didn't have a soft place to land, maybe outside of church. But then for us to say, I want to be intentional about giving myself space because, yes, I want to learn from the people before me, but also there's some things I want to do differently. I want to learn some new ways and new possibilities. Some people only know hitting kids as a way to correct behavior. So that's the only thing then in your mind, it's do that or nothing because you don't know any other way. So then, like, let me learn what are some other things that I can do. Um, so, I encourage therapy. I also encourage, making use of your village. Sometimes there are people who have offered to us, I'll watch the kids or, let me take them to the park or whatever. And when we're trying to be like a one person soldier, we're like, no, 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 I got it. I got it.
Mm.
Meanwhile, we're exhausted. I remember there was a couple of years ago, I was talking to my dad and he said, Tama, I don't think you know how tired you are. And he was right. Like, when you're going, you don't feel it. But look, you slow down and that fatigue will hit you.
Mhm.
And so make use of your support and allow people to be a part of your village. And then also in terms of your children's healing, when they share their painful experiences, for us not to dismiss it. I heard this stand-up comedian say, oh, these kids these days aren't built like us. And he was talking about, I don't know if his kid got a bad report card or something, but he said something insulting to the kid, and then the kid was suicidal. But
Mm,
he was so startled because it was like, oh, back in our day, they'd say all kinds of things to us, and like we weren't soft, as how he was putting it. But it's like, even if the people who raised you, called you all kinds of names or talked any kind of way to you, let's be able to attend to our child's experience without it having to go through the filter of me. It's not
mm,
like we are not the center of the story. So if what you said hurt your child, instead of just saying like they need to be tougher, then, a growth point is when adults can even apologize,
mm,
right? Because sometimes, in our frustration or irritation or whatever, you may have said some things or done some things that were honestly over the top, right? That it crossed a line. And so to be able to acknowledge that doesn't make you less of a parent. It actually makes you a better parent, because then your child can trust you that if you are wrong, which all of us mess up sometimes, that if I
mhm,
don't get it right, I'm willing to admit it.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I think the part that you mentioned about therapy too is, I think, realizing that you can be proactive to learn some skills and tools before you get to the point where you are maybe engaging in some maybe inappropriate like parenting strategies. And I know like there's a debate about spanking that's been centuries long, right? But I think, for some parents, it is that when you are stressed, you don't always think about what are the best ways to, like, to sit and talk with your child to understand
Mhm.
what they're going through, or to even process your own sort of stresses that you're sort of navigating yourself. And so really having that moment where you could like learn what are the things that I can do to help me have the best relationship, or to manage my child's behavior or their non-compliance if they're not doing the homework or whatever the
Okay.
sort of issue
Yeah.
is. So I think that's one of the things that sort of got me into this field, is being able to sort of work with families to say, how can we address some of these things sort of on the front end, as opposed to having these experiences and now we have to sort of backtrack to say, how can I sort of correct now some of
Mhm.
these mistakes or errors that I've made in my sort of parenting, or the ways that I maybe didn't respond, the best if my child, has ADHD and they're jumping up all over the place, but then I don't know why they're doing this, then
Mhm.
those are things that can also be really helpful.
Right. I'm glad you named that part about whether it's ADHD or something else that people are less familiar with. It reminded me of at a church I used to attend. There was a girl at the church who was on the spectrum with autism, and it's a black church, so it would get super loud. And when it would get very very loud, she would put her fingers in her ears and start rocking, trying to like soothe herself until the sound came down. But I call it the mothers of the church, they didn't know what that is. So they were saying she was being rude, and that the mother needed to correct her because you can't be in church with your fingers in your ears. But
Mm,
again, it's like when you don't know, you're just uninformed and calling something rude when really like this kid is like fighting for their life to get to the end of this election. So us learning some things that our foreparents didn't know.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, that reminded me of some of the clients that I've worked with in the past. And when I first was finishing up graduate school and was on my internship, I worked at a clinic that diagnosed things like ADHD and autism. And I just remember like just sort of sharing that information about the diagnosis sometimes helped parents to better understand like what was actually going on with their child. And so I think, while there is this like reluctance sometimes to like label our kids when they already may be oppressed because of their race, does sort of create this additional challenge sometimes. But it is helpful to at least understand and like know what is actually going on so that you can better help and support your child. So I appreciate you sharing that story. So I have one final question here, and then we can take questions if people have those as well. And so I think one of the things that I've seen in my work with families over the years is that sometimes parents feel guilty about like taking rest or, using their support systems to sort of help them out. And so what is maybe some advice or information that you can share with parents about like how can they give themselves permission to actually heal without sort of this sense of like the need to apologize, but also how it can be helpful to sort of model some of these coping strategies for their child.
Yeah, I think that modeling piece is so important when I consider when I'm doing a million things, when I'm overextending myself, when I'm running on empty, is that really the example that I want my kids to follow? Right? Do I want them to think you have to say yes to everyone and everything? Do I want them to witness neglect, like self neglect? Um, do I want them to take in the message that what everybody else wants and needs from you is more important than what your soul needs? And like that's not what the lesson I'm trying to teach them. It's not what I want them to do. And so for them to both witness and hear me talking about setting boundaries or saying no or resting, um, for that to be a part of it with them. And while I know some things are not an option, to sometimes give kids choices of like, would you want to go here? Would you like to stay home? Some kids like to be home, like they're at school all day, all week. And so just relaxing in the house may be actually more appealing to them than like ripping and running. So for us to learn to that pace, like a slower pace, and I think one of the things that was helpful for me too was not treating everything like it was urgent and not treating everything like it's mandatory. So instead, to say, like, there are some things that are actually optional. We don't have to do everything like now. So that messaging is helpful. And then I do want to say, if we're honest, when we have been raised by parents that were overwhelmed and stressed, we felt it, right? Some of us received some like negative behaviors because they really were not in a good place. And so even when you think you're functioning and you're fine, when you are not rested and nourished, it affects your parenting. It affects the way you show up in partnership. It affects your health. And so our care, we want to actually believe that we're worthy of it. We're worthy of being healthier. We're worthy of rest. We don't have to earn it. And like the way we are often raised is to think, I will like do a million things, get exhausted, and then I'll say, I deserve a break. Right? So it's like I break down, I take a break, and then I go back and do that same pace again. So instead, what would it look like for me to pace my life differently? So, as I would say, so that I don't have to constantly look for escape from my life, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. And one of the things that came up, excuse me, one of the things that came up for me was when you talked about rest, I was also thinking about sleep. And
Hmm.
so for me, like those are two distinctions that I
Yeah,
want to share because I think one, we're in a very sleep deprived society, none of us sleep
right.
enough, but
Yep.
also like that affects your mood and it affects a lot of different things. And I think sometimes we don't recognize that in ourselves about how important sleep is. But to add to that, rest is also something that we need to think about because rest is very different
Right.
than sleep.
And that's so important too, especially for people who have difficulty with sleep, is are you still resting? Right. So even if you're awake, you can still be restful. So
Mhm.
to give yourself permission to sit still and relax instead of saying, well, since I'm up anyway, I'm at like 3 a.m. cleaning the house. Right. So let's make another choice.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much. This is a really powerful conversation. So, for those that are watching live, this will be up on the YouTube channel, Therapy for Black Kids, on next week. And so, feel free to check it out and share it. We will open it up for questions. I see a couple in the chat. If others have questions that come up, feel free to post those as well, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But just quickly before we go into the questions, I did want to announce the raffle winner. So thank you all for joining in and staying on. The first two raffles are going to be for Dr. Thema's book, Matters of the Heart. And so we're going to give 2 copies of those away live today. And also on the YouTube channel, we will give away a 3rd copy of the book for someone who watches the video and leaves a comment. And we'll share this in the link after today as well. So the first winner here is Tanita. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I think I saw you still in the room. So congratulations on
Yay.
winning the first
I
copy of
hope
Dr.
you
Taylor's
enjoy
book.
it, Tanita.
The second winner of Dr. Tamer's book is Siobhan. I hope I pronounced it right.
Yay.
So congratulations
Awesome.
to you. And then
Excellent, Siobhan.
I'm also going to give away a copy of my book, Raising
Yes.
Resilient Black Kids, as well.
Excellent.
So that winner is Tyron. So I hope I pronounced that correctly. So congratulations
Yay.
as well.
Winning, winning, winning.
So the first question that I see here in the chat is about evaluations. And so what are some steps to get a 13-year-old evaluated for a diagnosis, something like
Yes.
ADHD or high
Sure.
function autism?
Yeah. So the easiest way is if you have insurance. So to go through your insurance company, then it's just the same way of like setting up with your primary care to say, I'm looking for someone to do a mental health assessment of my child, and they'll usually have a number of people in the system. Sometimes you can ask particular questions, or you can look up the people online to see, maybe how experienced they are or their bio to see if those particular diagnoses are listed as they're giving kind of their description or expertise. But that is, I would say, the easiest way. If you're having to pay out of pocket, then there are a number of directories for mental health professionals. And I would just say when you look at those directories, to look for people who are licensed, and then if they include in their description that they do assessments, because some of these directories also include life coaches, and a life coach is fine, but they do not do assessment.
Great, thank you. I also posted the link to our website in the chat. So there's a therapy locator site. So there's a couple of those directories that Dr. Tama sort of alluded to that you can find on our website. There was a question I want to go back to that was pre-submitted, and I'm not sure if the person is present or not, but
And then there was also a co-parenting question.
yes,
Okay,
I
sorry.
will get to that, but no worries.
Okay.
So this, I think, given your expertise in like trauma, I was wondering if you could maybe at least share some insight about this. So I try to sort of de-identify the question a little bit because I thought it was very specific. But I'm curious about if you have children in the school system, minors, girls in particular, who are being, I am labeling this as like sexual harassment, either inappropriate touching or saying, sexual comments towards a child related to their body from another student. What would be some ways that parents can sort of navigate that, especially when navigate that in teaching the child how to like protect themselves and speak up for themselves, especially when the school has not been responsive.
Yeah. So I would say, as the parent, or the guardian, the caretaker, for you to go to the school, because the school is responsible for what is happening with the students. And it's if they, know or should have known. And in this case, with them being non-responsive, they have been made aware of it, and no corrective action has been taken. And so, the bullying, sexual harassment, it's not acceptable, and it's also not for the kid alone to feel like they either have to just bear it or they need to be firmer to talk to other peers. Like there has to be adult intervention. And so, I understand people's work schedules are difficult, but I would say in-person visit is more effective than a phone call or email.
Mhm.
And so to go because the behaviors are not okay, and it one of the things we know that predicts recovery, trauma recovery, is the response to our disclosure. So when a
Mhm.
kid tells, do people take it seriously? That can help them to heal, to feel like I was believed and my parent came to support me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know that's a really difficult, I think, topic sometimes to sort of touch on, especially for parents about like, what to do if my child does disclose some of these things to me.
Right.
So I want to go back to the question about co-parenting. So, what are tips that you can share about co-parenting for parents who have children very differently? Sorry, I read that wrong. What tips can you share for co-parents who parent their child very differently?
Yes, this can be very challenging, and I would say, to try as much as possible to communicate with the other parent and see if any of these differences we can have a compromise on. Because, for example, let's say at one parent's house, your bedtime is at 8, and the other parent has no bedtime, right? That's a very drastic shift. I remember when my daughter was in preschool, there was a kid who the week they're with the mother, they're vegetarian. The week they're with their father, they can give them meat. It's
Mm,
just like, what is that? It's just confusion. So, people are different, and, some things are not negotiable, right? Some people feel strongly about some things, but I would just say if we can try to minimize them. So let's say it is something about diet or sleep. Can we agree on some other things for consistency? Or are there some things that aren't like worth the fight that I'm willing to go with that program just so the child can have some
mhm,
consistency? And then I would say explaining to the child why the rule is what it is at your house or when they're with you, but doing it in a way that's not putting down the other parent, right? So it wouldn't be like, well, I care about you and they don't. Like that is disruptive. But explaining, I understand you're used to staying up till midnight, but just from my experience, it doesn't work well for a kid to stay up that late. So when you're here, this is the time you're going to have to go to bed. And if you're laying there awake, I'm sure it's boring, but maybe you'll be bored enough to fall asleep. Right?
mhm, yeah.
So communicating with the child and trying not to uh, amplify the conflict.
Mhm. Great, thank you. There's also, I don't remember the actual title of this book, but I referred it to parents before around co-parenting. So there's a couple of books around co-parenting that may be helpful. So if I can remember when I send the video out, I'll share the resource
Great.
for parents that may be interested in that. So I don't know if you can answer the next question in the time that's left, but someone had posted a question about white parents of Black children in this current climate and any ways to support them.
Yeah. So one of the things that is very important is trying to let Black children have some experience in Black community. So often what happens, they're in a house where they're the only one, they're placed in a school that's based on that neighborhood where there aren't many other Black children. So, whether that is a Black faith-based space, a Black rites of passage program, Black cultural events. And I will, say to you just from people sharing stories with me, some of the things the kids may not even consciously recognize. I was talking to a white mom who was saying she would drive like 40 minutes further so her kid could be at a beach that was predominantly Black. Now, when the kid is older, she asked them if they recognized or realized that. The kid didn't register that. They were just going to the beach. But I will say unconsciously, they could feel that they're not the only Black kid on the beach.
Mm,
So, and even around Black artwork, getting children's books with Black people, giving them dolls that look like them, all of those things are helpful. And then having conversations with them where they can express their pain or their disappointment or their confusion. Um, and in your own friendship circle, making sure that do you have friends that are Black? Because that communicates a message as well of like, I'm willing to adopt or foster a Black child, but do I relate as a peer with Black adults?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I posted a link to a blog that I just wrote actually today about raising socially conscious youth, and one of those I think is like having some of those tough conversations around like some of the things that you brought up that might be really helpful, as a parent as well. Any final words that you would like to leave us with, Dr. Taylor, today?
Yes, I would like to say that parenting is challenging at any time, but especially in these high stress times. And so we want to give ourselves grace and compassion, but also give ourselves permission to try it a new way. You know, if what you're doing is not fruitful, to be open to learning, to adjusting so that the relationship can be better and stronger, and so that we can help our children to flourish. And I want to say, when you have children that are struggling, to continue to give them support and to believe for them that this doesn't have to be the end of their story. There
Mm,
are so many people that if you saw them now in adulthood, you wouldn't guess they struggled as kids, but they did. And, people have healed or coped and thrived. And so it's not too late.
great. Well, thank you so much for your comments and answering all of the questions today. And I appreciate all of you for taking the time to join us for our event. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.